Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce in Phoenix, White House correspondents Mary Alice Parks, political director Rick Klein, and contributor and presidential historian Mark Updegrove. So, Mary, you're there. You've covered this president. What did you make of this particular speech, essentially sounding some of the themes that brought him to the presidency and that remain the basis of his mission there in the White House?
Well, Terry, I have to tell you, these are some of the harshest and most direct attacks from President Biden against President Trump that we've heard in quite some time. This is obviously the president here trying to outline what is at stake in this election, really. You heard him in very stark terms argue that Trump and his allies really represent this existential threat to our democracy, to our democratic institutions. You heard him say something dangerous is happening here in America. The democracy is at risk. He cited, the dangers of election denialism, the erosion of democratic institutions, calling out attacks on the press, the rule of law, banning books, all of these things that we have seen recently. And then the president did something that he doesn't often do, actually calling out Donald Trump by name, quoting Trump as he argued that the Constitution lets him essentially do whatever he wants to do. President Biden arguing that Trump is acting out of vengeance and vindictiveness. And all of this is part of a familiar argument that we have heard from this president, as he argues that MAGA extremists, as he calls them, don't share the basic democratic values that are really at the core of this country. And the president is trying to offer an alternative. This is a message that is very clearly aimed at independent voters and, of course, those more traditional Republicans, like his former dear friend John McCain, who is honored here today, who may be looking for an alternative from Donald Trump.
And Mary, thank you. That is essentially the coalition that helped bring him into office. And Mary Alice, as Mary just pointed out, this is a political speech. It's a political season. It's an unusual one. Most political speeches have to do with the price of health care or gasoline, with the kinds of public services that people are looking for, with foreign policy. This one really absolutely bedrock issues. What do you make of this choice? And will we hear more of this from the president as he campaigns?
Absolutely, because these are the kinds of voters that he is trying to invite into the fold. The exact kind of voters that you said, exactly right, helped him get to the White House the first time. Those crossover voters who potentially might not agree with every bit of how Biden's handled the economy. We've seen his numbers lately really underwater. We've seen him struggling in the polls. But here we hear the president saying the stakes are just bigger than that, that the country, the democracy is at stake. It's not lost on anyone that he chose again to lift up a Republican, John McCain, as a model, a Republican that Trump so often tore down. We heard the president there say that the way that Trump talked about McCain, talked about other veterans like McCain, was un-American. Biden wants to talk about something bigger than his economic policies, bigger even than some of these hot-button issues we've seen in our politics lately around abortion, around climate. He wants to talk about something much more fundamental and foundational, because that's where he thinks he can invite people into the Democratic Party, people to vote for him. And frankly, what I think he really does believe is the single most important thing on the ballot, Terry.
Right. And that is his political faith, as I said. Well, Rick, what do you make of this decision that the president is laying this out, this fundamental threat to democracy, as a political argument? I mean, look, there was an urgency in 2020. There were a lot of people who were concerned about a second Trump term. A lot of people wanted a second Trump term. There was an urgency in 2022 after the attack on the Capitol in 2021. So is that urgency there today for voters to pick up on what the president is trying to argue for?
Terry, I was struck by something the president said in quoting the former president, naming him by name, as Mary pointed out. That's unusual for him to do, and saying, look, we forget these things. We don't want to remember some of the things that were said by President Trump, but he said them. And he went on to cite quite a litany, including some recent comments about the outgoing Joint Chiefs of Staff. So all of that, I think, is to say that President Biden recognizes that these things need reminding, and these are active attempts to try to define the terms of this race in bigger ways. I mean, look, if you looked at that Republican debate last night, Terry, there was really no talk at all about January 6th. There was no talk at all about the former president's false claims about the election. Trump was attacked glancingly by a bunch of the candidates, but it seemed like a pretty typical Republican debate. And that's what Joe Biden doesn't want to happen. His team and he personally believe that you need to outline these stakes as forcefully and as readily and as regularly as you can. And for him, these foundational bedrock principles that you talk about are political because they involve choices ahead. When he talks about the importance of Americans safeguarding democracy, well, he's really talking about voting. That's what this is about. And he comes at a time where his approval ratings are down. The polling suggests that the country's in something of a funk and taking it out on him. And this is an attempt to recast it in broad terms. He's done it before. I would expect he's going to do it a whole lot more before next November.
And Mark, from the historian's perspective, look, he's at the John McCain Library and Institute. Those are two men, Joe Biden and John McCain, colleagues, close friends, both born in the 1930s. Biden speaks the language here really of an older generation. And what do you think as a historian of the possibility that he can lift that spirit up from that generation and instill it in the election of 2024 in a way that it is an issue for people to vote on? What do you think of that?
Well, you know, I think Biden is always most powerful and eloquent when he's talking about democracy. But in this case, Terry, it was really personal. He was talking about John McCain, somebody whom he knew, somebody he was very close to, and they were sort of an emblem of bipartisanship, the two of them. But also, I think, you know, he said something in there, President Biden, that was key. He said that preserving democracy is the central issue of his presidency. It will also be the central pillar of his legacy. Joe Biden, at the end of the day, will be known for staving off a second term from Donald Trump. Who imagined that after January 6th, Donald Trump would still be a threat and would be the likely nominee of his party for president in 2024. So for Joe Biden, the job is not complete until he once again staves off this threat from Donald Trump and ultimately to our democracy. So a very important speech here today for President Biden, Terry.
And Mary, you know, here we are, here you are, I should say, in Phoenix, listening to the president sound these great themes. And here in Washington, where I am, you've got the impeachment inquiry with, you know, the Republicans essentially trying to, really at former President Trump's bidding. He demanded an impeachment of Biden. And I wonder, you know, about that contrast. What do you make of that?
It's quite a split-screen moment today. I can tell you that this event, you know, despite the remarkable timing, was actually on the books for quite some time. And the president deeply involved in these remarks. We're told he was tweaking them himself on the plane as they were arriving here in Arizona last night. But the White House communication shop, I can also tell you, has certainly been working overdrive today. They are trying to you know, point out what they believe is an important contrast, because they are using this moment to make the argument that the president is here focused on what really matters to this country, to focus on what is at stake for voters, while they say Republicans back on the Hill are focused on political theater. We have seen the White House argue and point out, they've been eager to point out that many Republicans make this argument as well, that so far there is no evidence that the president was involved in any kind of wrongdoing or linked directly at all to his son's business dealings. And so they are trying to create this really stark contrast. They also note, of course, that while the president's here giving this speech, that House Republicans are barreling towards a government shutdown. They, in fact, are sending out press updates every 15 minutes, counting down themselves and noting what will be the dire consequences economically for this country if we are allowed to shut down. So this is a split screen moment that this White House welcomes, because they think it allows them to show that the president is focused on governing and the big picture issues that matter most, while they say, you know, as you heard the president say here, that oftentimes it's one far right Republican or a handful of them who are really able to twist this government into knots. And they think that that is a big picture that benefits this White House politically.
A tale of two cities, two political scenes there. Mary Bruce, Mary Alice Parks, Rick Klein, Mark Updegrove, thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.